Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Purvi Zaveri, and I am the SMCDS president. A few announcements today before we begin. On November 12th, we have a mandatory long-term care insurance is coming to America. Are you going to be ready for it? It's a free member webinar presented by our business member, Michael Wong. November 17th, we have the general membership meeting. We have David Rothman talking on pediatric dentistry. December 3rd, we have Dr. Jeanette McLean, and she's speaking on minimal invasive dentistry interventions for enamel defects. So we hope you can join us. And at the end of today, at the end of our meeting, please do fill out an evaluation form. We value your input in planning our programs in the future. So thank you for being here, and thank you for doing that. Now I would like to introduce our wonderful lineup of speakers today. And all our 4 speakers are SMCDS business members. We appreciate their support throughout the year. Oromchian, JD, LL.M, is one of the nation's leading legal authorities on topics related to dentists. Since its creation, the Dental and Medical Council PC law firm has been regarded as one of the preeminent healthcare law firms devoted exclusively to healthcare professionals. His clients seek his advice on dental and medical practice transitions, creation of corporations and partnerships, associate contracts, estate planning, employment law matters, office leasing, and state board defense. We have C.J. Williams, and he is Vice President of Dental Financing with Bank of America. He specializes in practice acquisitions and real estate. His goal is to align you with a team that can help you find the practice of your dreams. Forrest Wiederman is a VP of Dental Financing in Northern California with Bank of America as well. He specializes in startups, existing doctor projects, debt consolidations, and commercial real estate. And last, we had Foad Ahmadi. He's a commercial real estate broker with Rome Commercial Realty. His expert knowledge of market conditions and ability to navigate complicated deals helps Foad guide practice owners at every stage of their career: startups, additional offices, lease negotiations, and building practices. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for doing this on a Saturday morning. We appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, all right. So, welcome, welcome. We are super excited to do this presentation. This is, and some speakers may say this, but we really mean it. This is our favorite dental society in the entire Bay Area. And I really mean it because you are the first dental society that I ever spoke at 17 years ago. And so I remember it, and your old director was so sweet and kind, and I remember how much time we spent here. And it's always been a tight-knit group, but a very engaged group. So I'm always excited to come back because it just brings back memories of when I was much younger and had no kids. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about practice ownership. But before we get started, we want to kind of ask what you are hoping to get out of today. Kind of what, not necessarily what questions you have, because those questions are going to come up as we talk, but like, what are your concerns? What are you hoping to walk out with in terms of knowledge? Anything like that. So let's just go around the room. Don't be shy. You're an intimate group. So just raise your hand and let's talk. Let us know what you'd like to learn, and Forrest will write it down. So let's get started. What do you guys want to learn? How much money can I get? Great question. Wonderful question. Off to a great start, guys. Off to a great start. Yes?
I would say how smooth a transition when it comes from, sale of a practice.
Okay, how to make a smooth transition? Great, yes?
Process.
The whole process, yep, A to Z. You gotta write faster than that for us.
I'm trying. Saturday morning, give me a break.
Smooth transition. Yeah. A to Z. Yes.
What precautions can we take as a new owner going into a recession?
Ah, great question. What do you do as a new owner if we go into a recession to lower your risk in a practice transition? Great question. Yes.
How to pick the right person for a transition?
Yes. Yes. It's kind of like picking a spouse. How do you pick the right person? Right? Yeah. See, you need the right person to help you sew those when you rip them.
I need a new
Yes,
signature.
that's right.
What was it? How to what?
How to pick the right buyer. Yes.
I'm in the same situation as Don over here. We're transitioning. I've got 2 younger associates, and I guess the question is, before talk of ownership, those of us who are still on Delta, what kind of considerations can I do to pre-position before some transition?
Before you transition. So the D word. That part of this video we are going to cut out. So yeah, the D word. Yes. Anytime the D word comes up, we're just going to cut that piece. It's going to go to commercial break, and then we're going to come back and talk the truth. Okay, go ahead. Like before you're born, you bring on a dental lawyer. As early as possible. Yes. No. When do you bring on a dental lawyer? When do you bring on the team? Really, because I think it's really about about everybody, because everybody plays a different role. So we'll talk about that. That's a really great question. Anything else, guys?
Legal aspects of having an associate. Basically, I know now it should be an independent contractor and all this kind of like.
Yeah.
Just give.
A little talk about it. Absolutely. Do we hire an independent contractor or an employee when bringing on an associate? Yeah, great question. And this is, by the way, that sounds like an easy question, and the answer is actually fairly easy, but it's a hard question that many people struggle with, including large group practices and DSOs. It's a complicated topic. But yes, anybody else? This is great.
Anything startup specific?
Yes.
Just in general, like the practices that are getting sold or transitioned in the Bay Area now, your feedback on like private sales, like doctor to doctor versus to the DSOs.
Yes, we'll talk about that too. The DSO versus private sale component, very important, because it has drastically changed since COVID. Drastically changed since COVID. Okay, well, great. So let's get started. So why this class? Why now? Well, you're all here for different reasons, right? You're different parts of your life cycle as a dentist. You're either just starting out, you're an associate looking to become a practice owner. You're either now, or you might be mid-career looking to bring on a partner, right? And kind of make that lifestyle a little bit maybe better. Or you're at the end of your career and you're looking to transition into retirement and you're looking to find a partner to bring on, or a seller or a buyer, I should say, to come over and take over your practice. But why now, right? Why is it so crucial today as opposed to pre-COVID? Well, a lot of things have changed because of COVID. A lot of things have changed because of COVID. First of all, a lot of associates, a lot of you in the room, were probably terminated when the shutdown happened in March or soon thereafter. So what happened there? You were left kind of out in the cold. And a lot of practice owners, not knowing kind of what was going to happen into the marketplace, fired not just you, but a lot of the other team members. And so you were left out there. Now, what kind of money did you all get as associates from the government? Did you get anything? Yeah, very, very little, right? Very little. Most likely unemployment. Practice owners, however, got PPP loans, not once, not twice, right? But they got EIDL loans if they wanted. They got other loans, from various healthcare organizations, that the federal government has. There was a lot of money available for business owners. And so the point is that to reach financial independence in dentistry, you have to own your own business, okay? You have to be a practice owner. You cannot reach that point working for someone else, right? It's impossible to do that as an associate for the entirety of your career because you have student loans and you have debts and you have other things and you live in the Bay Area, and it's so expensive to live here, you need all the tax breaks and all the tax advantages you can to get to financial independence. And to get there, you need to be a practice owner. Now, is this model my theory? No, it's not a theory. It's the actuality of how these numbers play out. You know, we have 7,000 clients nationwide that we see this example for, but also the DSOs, right? The reason the DSOs have ramped up the purchase of dental practices since COVID is because cash flow is even more important now than it was ever before. So they are buying top-line practices. They're not buying, I mean, they are still buying, you know, 4, 5, 10 offices, but now they're going after your offices, the onesies and twosies. And you guys have, I'm sure, received letters from them saying, sell to us, sell to us. Why do you think they're buying? They're buying because you're a cash flow heavy business and they can bank on that. The number one mistake you will make with talking to a DSO is sending in your financials, okay? Never, ever, ever send in your financials to a DSO if you ever want to sell to a DSO. It's a whole separate conversation from today. We can talk about that if you guys are thinking of selling, but that's not really the topic of what our goal is today. Today is about how do we get into practice ownership. And so to get to that point, we are going to become practice owners. Now, who recognizes this? Who is this? Yes, go ahead. Tina Turner. That's exactly right. Why do I show this? Because there is no alternative, right? For you to own, to get to financial independence, right? I want you, if you ever get scared, right? If you ever get scared of the recession, of the pandemic, of this, just imagine her face and just be like, there is no alternative, right? I have been through 6 recessions being a dental lawyer. I've been through a pandemic. And every single time, dentistry has come out stronger than it was going in. So not only is dentistry recession-proof, but it's now pandemic-proof as well. And so many of you, your practices are stronger today than they were pre-COVID, right? A lot of you. Not all of you, but a lot of you, that's the case. And so are we going into a recession? It looks like it. If it's like every other recession that some of you have experienced, you know that cosmetic stuff is going to go down, right? That's just the reality of it. Unless you're pedo, parents will still bring their kids. And if you're in the wrong class, you're a veterinarian here, you'll be fine as well. but in dental, the normal, fillings and bridges and crowns and all that stuff will remain. It's the veneers and the all-on-4s and all that kind of stuff that starts to kind of dissipate a little bit. But it is pandemic-proof. It is recession-proof. Don't be scared about it, right? Don't be scared about it. You just have to, the key is to buy or open the right practice, right? And that's what we're going to talk about, right? How do you buy the right practice? This is my family. I show this picture because my wife is a dentist in the East Bay, as some of you may know. She's a pediatric dentist there. And so I've lived your life. I've gone through what you're going through. She gets a ton of letters from DSOs as well. She's got a pretty large practice there. And so they're doing the same thing. They're coming after her. But she is going through a lot of the same things. So I see it on a personal level, but also obviously as a lawyer, with all the normal things that we do for dentists. But let's get into the keys of when you're going to be a practice owner. We're going to talk about lease negotiations first, and then we're going to talk about details of a practice purchase, and then finally HR and how to make sure you're limiting your risk when you're buying or starting your first practice. All right, so when you're looking at a lease, right, there are a bunch of different types of leases. There's really 3 kinds of leases out there. And this is important for whether you're looking to become a partner, an associate, you're looking to buy, you just have to know these details because this impacts the conversations you have. So the first is something called a triple net lease. It goes by the moniker of NNN, right? So you might see a sign that says it's $2 a square foot, NNN, right? Those 3 N's means triple net. What that means is that the landlord will pass on every single cost that they incur to you as the tenant. So if they have to change a light bulb, you're going to pay your fair share of that light bulb. If they have to change the HVAC system, repave the parking lot, do anything on the building, you pay your fair share of it. Okay? It's the worst kind of lease you can find. Okay? But guess what? It's the most common, right? Because when landlords go to landlord school and they're taught how to take advantage of you tenants, they're told, give them a triple net lease, right? Now, usually triple net leases are a little bit lower cost because they're passing on so many expenses compared to a full service lease. A full service lease is the exact opposite. It's the best kind of lease you can find. It's where you pay rent and you pay for nothing else, right? You just pay your rent and you're done. But it's the least common, right? Because you're not passing, passing on as much. Now, the reality is that here in the Bay Area, most places are going to have triple net leases, okay? Unless you're in an old office building or an old medical dental building, if you get lucky and find one of those, you might be in a full service lease. But most times, it's going to be a triple net lease. And so my advice here is don't walk away from a deal just because it's triple net, right? Just realize you need a commercial broker to negotiate those terms for you really aggressively, right? Like really aggressively, because it's about reducing the rental rate because you're paying so much triple net. It's about reducing other costs. Like we saw a deal recently, and it was kind of crazy. The lease said that the landlord was going to get a 15%. We negotiated down to 5%. A 15% management fee on all the expenses of the office, of the building. So not only were you paying all the expenses as the tenant, but they were adding a 15% management fee on top of that. But here's the kicker. The kicker was that they included real estate taxes on top of that. So imagine the money that they're making, right? And that they're just passing on to you. So it's really important. It's like these little things that really add up in terms of your lease. And so it's vitally important that you negotiate it aggressively, before we get involved, before a lawyer gets involved, which means in the letter of intent stage, but then also at the, on the legal side when we do actually get involved, we'll look at that as well. There's a third kind of lease called a modified gross lease. It's actually a really good lease as well. It's where it's like a combination of the triple net and the full service lease. They're out there if you can find them, but they're also kind of more on the rare side. All right, number 2 is tenant improvements and free rent. Regardless of whether you're doing a startup or whether you're doing an acquisition, it's really great to be able to negotiate tenant improvement dollars or free rent. And so in an ideal situation, if you're going to do a startup, what you want to do is you want to get free rent for the entire period of the construction. Okay, this is like your target. The entire period of construction plus 3 months after you open your doors. Okay, that should be your target, right? Because construction right now is taking 9 months, sometimes longer with the delays because of licensure and approvals and all this other stuff that happens at the city level. So you want to get free rent the entire construction period plus 3 months. Now, if you're trying to open up in Palo Alto, right, it's going to be hard to get even like a month of free rent, But if you're in other parts of the Bay Area or the peninsula, you can get more, right? You can get more. Foad has done a really great job here in the peninsula negotiating things with landlords, and it's hard. This is a hard area because, as most of you know, Google and Facebook and Apple and all of these guys are coming in, redeveloping a lot of the commercial landscape. And so they're buying buildings, old buildings that have you in there as dentists, and they're kicking you out to redevelop them. And so landlords are a little bit more, it's a little harder to negotiate. So you just have to be really, really careful about, the building you're in. But negotiating, upfront is really a good idea. Assignment and subletting. This is language. You might say, Ali, why would I care about assignment and subletting? I'm just starting my career. Well, you're going to have to, eventually one day you will sell or bring on a partner. God forbid something happens to you. You will have to sell your practice potentially. Life may change. You may, get pregnant and not be able to practice dentistry anymore because of complications. You may have a skiing accident. You may have a surfing accident. We've seen it all. Just yesterday, one of my doctors, found out that he's got a really bad medical issue that, will likely not allow him to ever work as a dentist again, and he's only like 52 years old, and may even, unfortunately, take his life. Those scary situations that happen, right? They happen, unfortunately. And so you need to be able to assign and sublet your space to someone else. Landlords will try to take back your space. Why do you think that is, guys? Why do they want to take back your space? Yes, exactly. They want to rent it for more because now you've built out this beautiful dental practice and now they can get more, right? And so what happens to the value of your practice if the landlord takes back the space? It dips, of course, right? Actually, it doesn't dip, it crashes, right? Because no one wants patients without a location, right? Very few people. So just kind of keep an eye on that. Recapture provisions are language that a lot of landlords here, actually in the Peninsula and South Bay, put on leases, which says that they can take back this space if one certain thing happens. You default on the rent, you sell your practice, you do any of those kinds of number of things. So again, we can't have that. Those are actually something called deal breakers, which means that if the landlord's not willing to remove that, you should just walk away from that location because it's crazy, right? To give back your space because of something like that. ADA improvements, you want the landlord to pay for ADA improvements if you're starting a practice from scratch. And the reason is because it could be very costly. The inside of the space, right, of your office is your responsibility. So there you have to do everything yourself. You got to make sure the bathrooms are ADA, the operatories are ADA, the hallways are ADA compliant, but the building itself, right, the parking lot and whatnot. When my wife did her first office, it cost the landlord $27,000 to repave and reline and stripe the parking lot because it wasn't ADA compliant, right? Which is crazy. I mean, it was like another 3 inches that they needed for each parking spot, so they had to restripe the whole parking lot. Thank God we had language in there that they were responsible for that. So it's like these little things, right? $27,000 here, $12,000 there, so on and so forth. They add up, right? They add up. And how does it add up? Well, it adds up that your take home is now less, right? And if your take home is less, that's less wealth building potential that you have because you're paying it to the landlord, right? You're paying it to the bank. You're paying it to third party equipment companies, that kind of thing. So you want to really kind of focus on the little things. Letter of intent is that we talked about this. This is the first document that starts this whole thing. You want to make sure you pay attention to it. Don't just sign it. Negotiate it as heavily as you can because everything that's in the letter of intent transfers to the lease. Okay, it transfers to the lease. Now, we've been talking about startups a lot, but a lot of these same things apply if you're buying an office, right? If you're buying an office. And so let's now transition to that. Yes?
I have a quick question.
Please, yeah.
Negotiations.
Yeah.
So if you're buying a practice,
Yes.
you're traditionally taking over the lease, right?
Yes.
So how often do you see people like renegotiate the lease at that point?
Yeah, great question. So when you buy an office, you take over the lease, but you don't take it over as is. So what happens is that you take it over plus you add some term because the banks require you to have at least 5 to 10 years, and usually those leases have caps, right, or they end. Now, the closer you are, or I should say the closer the seller is to the end of their lease, the more power you have as the buyer. Because now you're going in there saying, look, I'm thinking about buying this practice, and I want a new lease from you, and I want to be here for another 20 years, or however long, but I want these terms, right? And so you get a broker involved where they can help you negotiate with the landlord on those points. Does it always happen? No, because landlords know sometimes that, look, there's $500,000 of improvements in this practice. You're a buyer, you want the practice. They don't give you a lot, but they do give you sometimes enough to make it just a little bit better, right? And so you guys as sellers, you want to take a look at your lease and see, when does my lease end, okay? When does my lease end? So that you can sell in the last 18 months of your lease would be ideal, right? In the last 18 months of your lease. Because if you're like in the last 6 months of your lease and it takes you a little bit longer to find a buyer, you may have to sign a 5-year lease again with the landlord just to stay in your space so you can sell your practice. Well, the way it works in California, you're responsible for those 5 years financially. So if the buyer doesn't make their payments, their rent payments for whatever reason, the landlord can come after you, right? Can come after you, which is not great. Now, if you were in Texas, the rules there are different or the customs are different, that wouldn't be the case. No. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind as you're thinking of your transition. If you're thinking of, oh, I'm going to sell 3 years from now, but your lease expires in 2 years, guess what? Sell in 2 years, right? Start planning for it because it's not worth the risk of signing a 5-year lease, right? So you're right. Landlords, don't necessarily want to negotiate, but if they're thinking about, oh man, I could have this person for another 20 years, they're going to give you some love.
So you would bring on a broker at that point to
Yeah.
negotiate the lease?
A practice broker, yeah. I'm sorry, a real estate commercial broker, yeah. Yeah.
For Bay Area leases, do they give you the rights to renew? Because you don't want to like settle into a place and then 10 years later, like, oh, I'm going to get kicked out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's called an option to renew, and they do. Usually they give you 2 or 3 5-year options, so you can stay there for 10 years. Right? That's usually your initial lease term, and then you get 2 options to stay there 5 years. And it's your option, it's not the landlord's option. So you can say, I exercise it or I don't exercise it. Okay? Now, all this being said, should you rent your entire career?
No.
No, that's right. You want to try to buy the real estate that your office is in, okay? If you're fortunate enough and blessed enough to be able to do that. If not, right, try to find a condo and move your practice. And I know it's like, Ali, I just spent this much money building this out. You want me to do it again? Yes, yes, because in terms of building true wealth, it happens in real estate. It doesn't happen in dentistry. It happens with what you do with the money you make in dentistry, which is to invest it back into real estate, right? Right? And buying your building, if you can, that's the way to go. Now, the peninsula is very expensive, right? It's very, very, very expensive. So not all of you will be able to do that in your careers. And sometimes the numbers just don't even make sense, right, to do it. It's one of those rare areas in the whole country where it actually could be not so great, financially to do it. But don't be scared, right? Do the analysis, right? And it doesn't matter, by the way, if you spend $2 million or you spend 2.1 or 2.2, the price, like, if you can do it, $100,000 plus or minus doesn't matter because you're not flipping it. You're here for 20, 30 years, right? And so just kind of keep those things in mind, but it's always good to keep an eye out. And if we are going into a recession, that's opportunities for many of you, right? For many of you. So good. Okay, practice, purchase. Let's go through the documents. So it starts with a letter of intent, right? Practice brokers will push you to sign a letter of intent as quickly as possible. Just sign, just sign, just sign. It's okay. It's non-binding. It's kind of half true, right? It's non-binding in the sense that you can walk away from the deal if you're the buyer, or if you're the seller, you can walk away from the transaction if this buyer is not the right one for you, okay? It's non-binding in that sense. But it is binding in terms of the terms that you negotiate in the letter of intent. Everything you negotiate in the letter of intent transfers to the asset purchase agreement, right? You don't get a second bite at the apple, right? Whatever you negotiate up front transfers to the asset purchase agreement, and then the asset purchase agreement is negotiated by a lawyer, okay? So I bring this up because a lot of people just say, yeah, I'll sign, I'll figure it out later. No, do it up front, right? Do it up front. Now, it doesn't feel great because the brokers, their normal practice is they don't give you all the tax returns, all the information. They give you some information, and you got to base your decision on that, right? You got to base your decision on that. But the way the market is such a seller-friendly market right now that as buyers, you're going to pay full price or close to full price for a practice if you really want it, just because of the way things are, right? CJ at Bank of America will help you kind of judge that. If the price of the practice is way too high, he will give you a range of like, hey, this is a range of what we think this practice is not necessarily worth, but what you can afford and what we think this practice should be, valued at. But it's not an appraisal, it's not a valuation. It's more of like, this is what the bank is comfortable with, right? There's a practice here locally that's selling for a very large dollar amount, and the bank came in and said, you as the buyer are great, but we're going to give you only this much. The rest of it, we have to kind of figure out, right? And so the point is that it's a part of the conversation that you have to go through before signing the letter of intent. The asset purchase agreement is the legal document that transfers the practice from the seller to the buyer. Hugely important. If you're a seller in the room, the most important document for you is the exhibits, believe it or not, to the asset purchase agreement. The exhibits are where you do a lot of work, right? That's where you list all your employees' names, their salaries, their hours that they work, their benefits. You list all the equipment in your office that you're selling. Everything in your office that you're selling, you got to list it in the exhibit so the buyer knows. If you got a cone beam, a CEREC machine, whatever, all of that has to be listed. And then the schedule that a lot of people forget, but that's really important as a seller and for you guys as buyers too. It's called the continuing contracts exhibit. Okay? So what is a continuing contract? What do you guys think? What's a continuing? What's that? Dental insurance. You mean like the D word? Yeah, no, no, it's not them. It's close though, very close. What else? What do you guys think? Go ahead.
Maybe it's like your phone number or your website or all those things that continue?
Yep, exactly. That's exactly right. They're contracts that you as the seller have signed to be in business, right? So a marketing company, right? If you pay $1,000 a month for your website, if you have HR for health, you pay a couple $100 for your HR. You have somebody coming every year for OSHA. These are contracts that you have in place that are in the business. Well, when you sell your practice, you don't want to keep those contracts, right? Because why would you pay for a website that you've sold the practice to? So you want to transfer those to the buyer, and it's very important that these get listed in this exhibit. Anything not listed in the exhibit doesn't transfer over. Doesn't transfer over. So you as the buyers also here, you need to know what's on that list, right? You need to know, hey, are they paying for, a $27,000 a year Yellow Pages ad, right? Which, by the way, I hadn't seen in a long time, and I just recently saw it. I was like, what? Is that right? But you got to know what those are so that you know what gets transferred over, right? And so, and what happens is that you get to the end of the transaction, and then suddenly, like, someone will say, oh, you got to make this list. And if you're a seller, you're like, oh my gosh, I got to go through all my credit cards. I got to go through all my bank statements. I got to go through all of this. It's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work. So it's important to start writing those down there. Lease assignment, we talked about that. That's when the lease gets assigned to a buyer, and then the buyer negotiates a new lease with new terms. And then if you as a seller are going to work back for more than 3 months, you should want an associate agreement. You as the buyer definitely want to give your sellers an associate agreement, if they're going to work for 3 months or more. Okay. All right. Oh, that was the wrong order. Okay. Restricted covenant. Yes.
For LOIs, if the seller's broker wouldn't release the financials until you sign the LOI, is that a red flag?
No, that's unfortunately the way it works. They won't release the tax returns, the P&Ls, all of that, but they will give you a summary of all the financials. So you base your decision on the summary that they give you. If it proves to be false, then you can adjust your price, right? If they said, oh, the practice is doing 1.2 million, and then you find out that the tax returns show it's only doing 900,000 because they're pocketing 300 cash, which sometimes happens, you adjust your number, right? You adjust your number, because at that point, what they've told you and what's actual is different.
It's probably reverse, right, Oli? Like if they give you the financials without signing something, they probably can't sell it.
Yeah.
So they're probably trying to get you to look at it quicker.
Yeah, that's right.
The reverse.
Yeah. It's what's really key is due diligence for a buyer. Due diligence is where you're doing your homework on a practice after you've been chosen as the buyer, right? And so once you get the LOI signed and the broker starts working on the contracts, that's when you do due diligence. And due diligence is financial due diligence, it's legal due diligence, and then the most important one, I think, not the most important, but very important, is practice management due diligence, which you hire a consultant who this is all they do for you, and they go in and they analyze all of the practice data. How many new patients are there? What kind of insurance is? What are the ages of the patients? Do they accept copays? Very important, the copay issue, right? Do they, what are all these other things that are going on with the practice? That way you know more than anything, about this practice, and that's really where you get to learn. And it's not that, you're gonna learn some bad things. You're gonna be like, oh my gosh, they don't pre-appoint hygiene. That's okay, as long as you're not surprised by it, right? Because if you know that the practice is not doing certain things correctly, what will you do? You'll fix it, because you know you bought it at a discount because they don't pre-appoint hygiene, right? And so you're gonna fix it as soon as you get into the practice. But what sucks is if you buy a practice, you get in, and then suddenly realize, oh, they don't do this, oh, they don't do this, oh, they don't do this. Then you're surprised and you can't plan for it, right? So don't give up on the practice of your dreams if it's an awesome location with an awesome bones just because you find, some skeletons hidden places. It's really about knowing where the skeletons are, right? And if that's not if that's not you, right? You don't like to buy used cars, you don't like to buy used things because you just like your new stuff, then start a new practice. Build it from scratch. Make it yours, right? The ROI, believe it or not, is better when you do your own office from scratch than if you buy someone's office. But it gives us peace of mind when we buy someone's office because we know there's cash flow, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, restricted covenants. This is 100% illegal in California. So in every single situation, except when you are selling a practice, okay? When you're selling a practice, the buyer can restrict you as the seller from competing against them, right? It makes sense, right? We don't want people to sell businesses and then walk down the street and open up another business, right? So it's usually 5 years long and anywhere from 15 to 25 miles, okay? What should you do as a seller? Should you negotiate the restricted covenant? What do you guys think? What happens if you as a seller negotiate the restricted covenant? What's that? You lose your buyer, yeah, exactly. Why? Because it's a red flag, right? You just told them you want to go golf in Arizona, you want to move to Utah, and because you bought a mountain house. You're telling them all this stuff about retirement, but then suddenly you're like, no, I don't want a 25-mile covenant, I want a 10-mile covenant. Why, doctor? I don't know. Just because? Yes?
So what do you suggest is the remedy in the restricted covenant should it unfortunately happen? Do you have a liquidated damages clause?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we really launched this in dentistry many years ago, which we added something called liquidated damages, which a lot of lawyers hated when I started doing it, but now everyone does it. Basically, liquidated damages is a term that says that if you as the seller breach the restricted covenant, you go work for someone else, the buyer does not have to prove damages. They don't have to say, oh, you saw 10 patients and they were $1,000 each, so you owe me this much. They just have to go after the penalty. They just have to prove that you breached it, and then they get the penalty that's detailed in the contract, okay? Which is usually a big penalty, 25% of the sale price, $20,000 per patient that you see, $50,000 for an office manager that you steal, all that kind of stuff. Like, I go pretty aggressive on it because the point is, don't do that, right? Like, I've given you top dollar, don't compete against me. You get to teach still, you get to do CDA cares, volunteer work. You just can't be a consultant, an advisor, a partner, a lender. You can't do anything in private practice, right? Yes?
What if the seller wants to be an associate in another practice?
Nope.
No,
Nope. Not allowed. Not an associate, nothing. Like, they have to go outside the covenant area. So as a buyer, you should go 25 miles or 20 miles, and then the sellers just don't compete. Just don't negotiate that part of it, right? Let the buyers have what they want because it'll cause red flags. Yes?
And would you say as the crow flies, or is
It is always as the crow flies. Yeah, it's always as the crow flies. By the way, our audio visual guy is an oral surgeon. across the street, which is why he's got some really great questions. So all right, so that's the restricted covenant, right? It's a restricted covenant. All right, human resources. The number one threat to you as a buyer and to you as a seller is HR, okay? It's not clinical dentistry. It's not malpractice. It's HR. And so we're going to talk about this as a buyer and as a seller. So as a buyer, you need 12 to 20 documents per employee in your office when you buy an office, okay? You've got to give them all these required documents. If you're a seller, you need 12 to 20 documents per employee in your office right now to minimize your exposure post-retirement. I cannot tell you the secret, kind of silent killer that no one talks about is how many doctors in retirement get sued by their team, right? Because people are embarrassed, people are scared, they lose a bunch of their retirement income and savings because employees come and they sue the seller in retirement, okay? Why? Because if you've done things wrong in your practice and now you sell your practice, people feel deserted, they feel uncomfortable because they can't retire and yet you're retiring and they feel like they were part of the practice for many years. Even if you have employees of 20, 30 years, I've seen it all, right? They will sue. They might love you and they will say that in depositions. Oh my gosh, I love the doctor. I loved her spouse or his spouse. They bought me a stroller when my baby was born, and when I was sick, they did this, and when my mother was this. They love you, but they don't, if they didn't get their money in retirement and you've retired, they will come after you because they have no loyalty to you anymore, right? So make sure you get your HR house in order. Benefits and time clock needs to be automated, right? Benefits right now in California are huge, huge. Obviously, you have sick days, paid sick time that is very difficult to manage in many situations. You need to keep track of it in real time. 401k is now required, as many of you hopefully know, as of July of 2020. So if you have 5 or more employees, you must give 401k to your employees. Yes.
But that's only full-time, right?
All kinds of employees. Yeah, but there are, actually, let me rephrase that. You have to give it to all employees, but you can restrict if in your own policy if it's who you want to give it to. But the minimum is if they work 1,000 hours a year, which is half time, they must get it. Okay? Okay. So that's California law now. So you see, there's a lot of little loopholes. So if you're a seller here today, get your HR house in order, right? Talk to HR for health, get it in order. The secret sauce that no one talks about in HR is that if you fix your HR today, it doesn't matter if you've done things wrong for 30 years. You can actually be okay because moving forward, you're definitely okay, and then we can fix the last 2 or 3 years, and it's not that painful. But as soon as you get a letter from a lawyer, it's all over, right? You can't fix it at that point, right? You can't fix it at that point. And if you're a young doctor here today and you're going to buy your office or start an office from scratch, just do it right from day one, right? Get HR for health, get your benefits figured out, do payroll, do it all right from day one, and then you never have to look at it again, right? You never have to look at it again. It's that simple, right? Because it's that much of a risk, okay? Here are some of the required documents that you need as I end today. Employment applications, W-4, I-9. It's a felony in California to hire an illegal immigrant to work for you, so make sure you're careful about that. And the person that you hire that's illegal is not going to be your stereotypical illegal person. It's somebody who's got a lot of experience in dental, usually a front office position, office manager, financial coordinator, whatnot. You won't ever think that they're not legal, but they could not be. Sexual harassment information sheet. If you're planning on sexually harassing your employees, just don't give them that sheet. Okay? All right? For you, it's one less document. Okay? All right? For everybody else, give them that sheet as well. Of course, you need an employment manual. Don't skip on that. It's vitally important post-COVID now in dental. An at-will acknowledgement, of course, which means that if you can fire anybody at any time, and they can quit on you at any time. You need that form. It's not actually true in California, but you need that form anyways. Okay, so what have we talked about? A lot of small things, right? A lot of detail. There's a lot that goes into buying an office and selling an office. we've talked about some of them. We're going to touch about the rest of them as CJ and Forrest and Foad talk. But ask your questions, because it's these little things, right, that add up to big things. And it's these little things that allow you to have a thriving practice where you're able to hire the employees you want, be able to fund your family with financial gains, pay off your student loans, be able to buy the homes that you want, and be able to do it for your family. But the moment of truth really is, what are you going to do next? And so I'd like to take a second and have you write down something you've learned today from my seminar that you're going to do in the next 7 days, right? So that you're going to do in the next 7 days. So this could be, for example, you know what? I'm going to check and see if I have all the HR documents, right? It might be, you know what? I'm really going to move forward with the purchase of this practice, and I'm going to talk to the broker. I'm going to get pre-approved with the bank. Just something that you're going to do in the next 7 days. And then one other thing that you're going to do in 14 days that you learned from me, hopefully today. And then one final thing that you're going to do in 21 days. And why do I do this? The reason is that we are learning stuff today, hopefully, and it goes in our memories. But there's this thought, right? There's this belief that our memories are to remember the past. But our memories are not really to remember the past. Our memories are so that we don't make the mistakes of what we've learned in the future, right? And so that's where you are today, right? You've learned a lot, right? And you're going to keep learning as you ask questions, but use this knowledge for what you want to do in the future so you don't make the same mistakes. If you sat on the sideline and you haven't bought a practice, but you've wanted to because you were afraid of the recession, or you were afraid of leases or landlords or lawyers or whatever, use this as an opportunity to do more. And the fact that you write it down means that you're telling the universe, this is super important for you, right? You're telling the universe, this is what I care about, these 3 things. And it's incredible as you do them, how things just start to roll, and then you start to achieve your dreams. So if you guys want, I've got 2 white papers for those of you who are building a dental practice. If you take a picture of this QR code, you'll get this white paper that I wrote in your email. And for those of you, I'll let you guys take a quick picture. For those of you who want to buy a practice, we've got this other QR code for that. And you can, it's a little bit more detailed information on the things we've talked about today, but it just sort of sits in your email. You can always reference it. We've got also one for those who are selling a practice, but it's not up here. I can send it to you guys separately. All right, this is my information, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh.
That was really good.
Good, thank you.
Great job, all. It's almost like I heard it yesterday. Great. How's everybody doing? Great? Great? Awesome.
Yeah, we got one, yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's talk banking for 35 minutes, huh? It's going to be exciting. It's a pleasure to meet everyone. Thanks for spending your time on a Saturday. Just so FYI, I know we're talking into microphones, this is being recorded. So I'm seeing a ton of you frantically write down some things. So just know that the society is going to post this somewhere with a link so that you can view again in case you miss something exciting. All right, let's talk about this. So we're going to get into, we want this to be open. Obviously a small room, there's a mix of crowd from levels of where you're at. So let's start with this. Who owns a practice in the room? Okay, cool. How many of you have been, now that's great. So how many are associates? The rest of you, I hope, unless you're not working. How many of you associate in a corporate setting? Oh, we almost had no one. Good, okay. And then private practice, obviously, is the rest. How about licensed? 10 years or more? Okay, 5 years or more? 2 years? Okay, cool. Just trying to get a feel from where we're going to go with this. So
also, who's looking to start up a practice versus buy? Okay, so we'll make sure to touch on that.
So let's tell you this, just one real quick fact off, because one of your comments on the board was about default rate. So we have a $7 billion portfolio in just dental, medical, and veterinary. Does anyone want to guess what our default rate is? 0.33. So less than 0.5%. And actually, like coming out of COVID, it was negative. So we were making more not writing off the loans as charge-offs. So just know you're in a fail-proof business. And Forrest will touch a little bit about that when we talk about moving forward.
Yep, so this is the only commercial, so bear with me for a second. So who is Bank of America Practice Solutions? So we are the boutique division within Bank of America. All we do is healthcare. So CJ and I specifically, all we do is dental. So we are so specific that CJ only does acquisitions and I only do projects. So I work with startups and existing doctors looking to do any type of project as well. And there's 45 of us across the country. We have 2 headquarters. Our main hub is in Columbus, Ohio, and then we have a West Coast internal team in Chandler, Arizona. There's about 400 people within our division, and as CJ mentioned, we have about $7 billion on our portfolio and 0.33 default rate. So I always like telling people that dental is the #2 lowest default rate in all of small business. Can anybody guess what number 1 is? All of small business, not just healthcare.
It's a good guess, though. Vet's right behind
Yeah,
you. Vet's right behind
Vet's #3, so you guys are 2. Funeral homes. And it's not because people die every day. We all know that, but it's because it's hand down from family to from generation to generation. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and a lot of you, I see a lot of faces in the room. We're the California Dental Association endorsed lender, so we've seen a lot of you at the CDA. Okay, moving on, education.
So yeah, banks are offering up to 100% finance. So if you're an associate in this room and you are looking to either buy or start up a practice, and someone tells you to put money down, I would run. So for the most part, we're gonna do 100% financing, especially on my end from a startup standpoint, we're gonna do all of it. Real estate purchasing versus leasing, as Ali mentioned earlier today, if you're trying to buy a building and start up a practice in the South Bay Peninsula area, it can be very challenging just from a price point standpoint. So depending on the situation, like Ali mentioned, if you're an established doctor and you want to buy your building, it's a lot, I wouldn't say a lot easier, but it's more realistic to be able to qualify because we have up to 100% financing for established owners that are looking to buy your real estate. But at the end of the day, that is the end goal, right? Because it's a great retirement plan. You have an annuity every single month of recurring income. Once you retire and sell off your practice, that you still maintain the building. So being able to own your building is definitely a long-term goal.
Yeah, so a little bit more in the marketplace. The retail's moving online. Obviously, you see that with Amazon. Obviously, in the ease of buying things. You know, gone are the days. Well, you still get it, but phasing out of that supply rep who walks into your office every single day. It's a little bit different environment of purchasing. Project cost increases.
Yeah, so the project cost increase right now is kind of a touchy subject to me because I deal with it every single day. So what I will say to that is make sure you're doing your due diligence, make sure you're getting multiple bids from multiple contractors, and on top of that, making sure they are dental specific. Because for many reasons, the most important one in my opinion is the opportunity cost that you leave out on the table. Because if you hire a dental specific or a non-dental specific contractor that may do some retail here, some commercial here, some residential here, they just don't understand the realistic timelines and how projects need to go from the dental standpoint. So that's where it might take 2, 3, 4 months longer than if we're working with somebody that is dental specific, and that's costing you more interest on my loan, right? On top of that, there's an opportunity cost that you lose because your practice may take 3, 4, 5 months extra to open, and that's lost revenue that you could have generated by opening earlier.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, not just project cost increases, we're also seeing delays in projects in general for multiple reasons, one of which permitting is taking forever, anywhere from 4 to 8 months. And on top of that, if you were to look, for me, for example, on the equipment side, the equipment delays right now, if you were to say, for example, next month you're probably gonna end up signing your lease. I would order your equipment now. Because if you want an ADEC chair right now, and you order it tomorrow, you're probably not gonna get it until July August, maybe. So that's where if you are talking to an equipment specialist and they are telling you you have to order it now, they're not just trying to sell you. That's just realistically how long it's taking to get your equipment.
Right. And then the recession word, listen, like Ali mentioned, through the 2008 was one of the best years we had giving out loans, and our clients made it through at like a 98% clip through COVID. So just understand that, yes, rates are rising. If we talked today, I'm probably quoting you something close to 5. If we talked a month ago, I was probably quoting you something close to 4. If we talked a year ago, I was quoting you something close to 2. And if we talked a year and a half ago, I was quoting you something with a 1 in front of it. So 18 months, it's up 4%. That's just reality. Now listen, some of the folks who are more experienced and own practices are probably laughing in the back of their mind because the first loan they took out was 12%. And it was on like a 5-year term versus your 5% on a 15 or a 10 or a 12-year term. So yes, are rates rising? Yes. Is the Fed going to hike rates in next month another 75 basis point or 3/4 of a basis point? Yes. So just know, however, you should understand that I think, I'm doing this 10 years, I think a small business loan should sit somewhere in a 6% range. You're unique in the fact that you have a low default rate and everybody wants to lend to you versus like a restaurant, right, is more like a year and a half kind of run usually. However, so don't get afraid. Like I'm talking to people that we talked a year ago and I was quoting them 3 something. It's just rising back to normal. We're at a historically low point. But I would say don't pass up an opportunity. What's the old adage? You know, don't trip over nickels to pick up pennies, right? The difference between a 4.5 and a 4.9 is like $250. So don't get caught up. It's not all about interest rate. We'll talk about that a little bit. Seller's market. This would probably be the one slide that I change, mostly because it's not necessarily right now. A lot of the younger folks in the room, you're coming out of COVID. Maybe you got unemployed for a little bit. The old adage, if you've talked to a broker in your career, right, a practice broker, so not somebody like Foad, but a practice broker, their old adage was, you better put an offer in because there's 10 people standing out the door to buy it. And I would tell you right now, call their bluff, because there's not. Now, if you want to be in Sunnyvale, Walnut Creek, or Roseville up near Sacramento, yeah, there's probably like 7 people standing out the back door. But that's where everyone wants to be, or where not where everyone wants to be, but where the high demand areas are right now. But just know that that's an old adage of there's 10 people standing out the back of the door. Do your due diligence. If a broker rushes you to sign an LOI without having Ali take a look at it, pump the brakes, because honestly, in my opinion, I'm not signing anything without having my attorney look at it. Because what does an LOI get for you? A letter of intent, right? It gets you to start the due diligence process, right? It feels kind of backwards when you're doing an LOI, right? Wait, I don't get the financials until I submit the LOI, but then I only have like 30 days to look at that before I have to make the biggest financial decision of my life, right? However, that's just the way it goes. And you just need to protect yourself because not only do you want the financials and want to do due diligence, but I also need Ali to put clauses in there to get you out of the scenario if something doesn't smell right, right? So just know that the buyers are taking control for, what would you say, Ali? Probably the first time in 10 or 15 years. It's a little bit more. Now, certain markets, maybe not as much, but for sure, the younger folks who are looking to acquire, you have a little bit more leverage right now. And then values determined by competition. Don't be worried about competition. Competition's a thing, right? The way you market, the way you position yourself, the way you either design your practice, and when you buy your practice, you're buying a legacy, so it's already established. You are it, right? So the other people in the room, they're not your competition. You know who is your competition, though? The DSOs. The bad word. Okay, let's talk about DSOs for a second. Yeah, the other D word. You know who's your ultimate competition? Insurance. Let's talk about DSOs. DSO model right now, like Ali mentioned, you know, they used to grab the conglomerates, is what I tell them, the emerging DSOs. The guys and gals who own 7 or 8 practices, that was always their dream, right? To get purchased by a DSO. Well, they have a foothold now. I don't think I put it on here. Oh yeah. So that's still the percentage, right? That's a couple years old. But private practice is still around 75% of the market. So you still have it. They don't have it. They don't have the control, right? Their model right now is to, let's just say Forrest owns 8 practices in the Bay Area. Their model will come in and say, I'll take Walnut Creek, but I don't want San Ramon. I'll take Napa, but I don't want Vacaville. So they're picking and choosing. And some of them are just approaching people, and if you say no, then they're just leasing the spot 2 doors down from you and doing a startup. So their approach has changed, and their approach has changed on who they're looking for. They're spending a ton of, some of you who are recently in school, and the females in the room especially, right? More females are graduating than males right now out of dental school. So the DSOs have recognized that. They are walking every single one of the females into a room, and they're saying, you can be a mother, and you can come work for us, and you can have quality of life because you don't have to own. But then at the end of the day, you're working owner-operator hours for associate pay. And that's their model. I know somebody who, she has been relocated 3 times by a major DSO. They have paid down her student loans $50,000 each time that they have relocated, but she's in a contract with them for the next 12 years. She can't, and she's not gonna get out. So, both sides of the fence, owners and associates, let's talk about this. If you get any sort of contract from a DSO, whether it's as an associate, or they promise you some sort of ownership, or they're approaching you to buy your office, just get Ali to review that document. Why? Last story on the DSO. We were doing a presentation in Las Vegas for Dentsply's Corona World, and there's a guy in the room, we were talking about DSOs, and he raised his hand, and he said he ran a $3 million practice in Nebraska. He was given a letter of intent from a DSO, and they told him they would essentially give him $8 million for the practice. He had a son who was graduating from dental school in Phoenix, and you know, he had been told by the banks, you know, for that practice we'll give you like $2.2 million, or something in that range. So, give it to his son, 2.2. Give it to the DSO for $8 million. For that difference, you could start your son 8 practices, for that matter, right? However, so he just throws his contract to a consultant friend of his, who looks it over. Okay, so they were going to give him $750,000 at the closing table. If he wanted to buy back into the hygiene profit, he had to write them a $500,000 check at the closing table. Then he had to produce $1.8 million for the next 5 years to be paid in $300,000 increments 6 times throughout the year. Why do they do that? They do that because they're hoping you get 3 years into that 5-year agreement and say, screw this, I'm out. Like, I wanted to retire 3 years ago. And so then you go, perfect. They finalized the check for 1.9, and he could have got more money from his son. So just know everything is not as it seems. Everything's cupcakes and rainbows. Get people to look. Get people to look at your contract. Again, I can't imagine signing something without having somebody look over it who knows and does that stuff every day. So they're poaching. They're starting up. But here's the reality. They're not really, most of them aren't even looking for the type of patient that you probably want to walk through your doors anyway. So don't worry about it. And like I said, you're still the main driver in the market.
So when it comes to what should I look for in a loan, there's really 6 main things that I like to talk about. Number 1, most important, dental specific, right? We talk about this all day long, regardless of whether it's your lender, your CPA, your attorney, your real estate broker. Make sure they're dental specific, please. And I mean, we're the #1 largest dental specific lender in the country. So if we say no, you should probably ask why, right? Because literally all we do every single day. So that's number one, make sure they're dental specific. Number two, this is what everybody thinks is the most important thing in the loan. Can anybody guess? 3, 2, 1, rate. Rate is not the most important thing within a loan. Is it important? Yes. But is it the most important thing? No. Number 3 is term. So when you're buying a practice, when you're starting up a practice, make sure that you understand what your options are for the term, the repayment period. So for me, on the startup end, we have what's called graduated payments because we understand the first 4 years of starting up a practice are the hardest, right? Cash flow is so important, so making sure you have a lender that has experience of this and knows how to get it done the right way, right? And on the acquisition side, in my personal opinion, I always tell people get the longest term possible for cash flow purposes because once you get into the practice, you can pay us off after 5 years, but making sure that your overhead and including your mortgage payment to us is as low as possible with getting up to 15 years for an acquisition. It's just better that way, and especially as you're coming in to transition, taking over a practice, there's natural attrition, right? So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility on that end. Number 4, fees, making sure you understand the fees, because some lenders might have a little bit lower of a rate, but they bake fees in certain places too, so make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Number 5, SBA versus conventional. So this is a big one. So the SBA joke is they'll take your house, your spouse, and your firstborn. So if you're starting up a practice from scratch, don't get me wrong, there are certain times where you have to get an SBA loan. It's when there's a building involved, but like I said earlier, first-time practice owner on the peninsula is a little bit harder to qualify for something like that. So 100% financing conventional for whether you're starting up or buying is typically what you're going to want to see. And then the last one, number 6, is long-term growth strategy. So what I mean by that is if you are looking to own 2, 3, 4, 5 practices, make sure whatever lender that you're working with has clients that have multi-practice owners, that are multi-practice owners. So we have doctors that own 5, 10, 15, a couple that even own 20 practices, but I will preface that they started with us with number 1. So just to review, dental specific, rate, term, SBA versus conventional, long-term growth strategy, and fees.
Awesome. And then this is credit score, and then that was credit score. So credit score doesn't matter, guys. It's not like you're going to Best Buy to buy a TV. All you need to know is you need to be above 700, relatively. How you get there, pay off credit cards monthly, make sure you're on time. It's always going to say not established credit history. I don't know when you become established credit history. Now, the big one we get is if I apply with different banks to go through the process, does that affect my credit score? If you apply for 9 of them, I'll call you a crazy person because we're all relatively around the same. There's not much difference. There are bigger differences in everything except for the loan, banking, ease of banking, and doing the business moving forward. But should you get an apples-to-apples comparison? Absolutely. And you should talk through those. But credit score isn't as big of a thing as these 5 things. So this is what we're judging any borrower on, whether it's someone who owns a practice and is growing or someone who's the first time. Who are you? Character. Did you pay down your debts? Did you rack up debts and not pay them down? Did you make payments? Right? No making payments is a big, big, big issue. What are you using as collateral? So am I having to sign my spouse on? Am I having to sign my house over? Those are things you should be asking. Reality, you are in a community property state. You know what that means? So what's yours is his or hers, and what's hers is yours or his, right? So it doesn't matter if you sign on the dotted line, you're at risk if something were going to go wrong. We've talked about the risk. There's not much risk in this business if you do all the due diligence and protect yourself. And also the reality of kind of being in the peninsula is some of you may have spouses who work at some tech companies that make really, really good money. It's not because we don't doubt your ability to produce, or it's not because you're not qualified. It's also just because, hey, look, this market is volatile, and having somebody with a steady paycheck to help you out and sign on the loan isn't always a bad thing, right? They're just guaranteeing your success. So be open to it if that's something that comes up. How many of you, well, we'll do that later actually. Conditions, there's always conditions to close a loan. Just make sure that they are. Cash flow. This is a cash flow based lender. Like I said, you're not going to Best Buy. I'm not giving you an interest rate because of your credit score. Interest rate, when you think of interest rate, think of term. So the longer the term, usually the higher the interest rate, but right now the difference is like 0.04. There's almost no difference. So that's why when Forrest says if you can get a 15 or 12, take it. Don't restrict yourself because you don't like debt and you want, because then your payment goes massive, right? Get the cash flow. Insurances are taking months to turn around and get into your name at this point, so you want the flexibility to grow as you grow the practice. And how much are you investing? Dental school debt is real. So for the practice owners in the room, your first question this morning when you woke up was probably, they have 600 grand in student loan debt. There's no way. There is a way. You have to do it responsibly. So when I talk responsibly, I mean, okay, how many people have heard that if you, just because you're in public service, if you work for 20 years, they'll forgive your student loans? Well, that's great that none of you have heard that, because that's an adage out there. What I'll say to that is administrations change, rules change, different things change. So it's never guaranteed. What I'll tell you is guaranteed is if you're paying your student loan, or if you're not paying your student loans because you think they're going to get forgiven in 20 years, the $500,000 it took you to go to school at UOP is going to, in 10 years, now be at $1 million, and now you can't even buy that TV at Best Buy. So just know you need to attack, if you're on IBR or repay and you're a couple years out of school, awesome, good for you. But the minute you can start paying more, do it. Because the minute you're paying less than principal and interest, it starts tacking on the back end. Yes?
I also heard that even if they forgive it, they consider it taxable income.
Right.
And so you're still responsible for all that money.
Right. Is that what you were going to say, Ollie? Yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Yeah, it's considered taxable income anytime a gift or a loan, I should say, is forgiven, and so you're still paying 50% of that, right?
Right.
Tax, which is crazy.
And student loan interest rates are, I mean, they're not low. So I had a client who, first time I talked to him, he was at 550, and I talked to him a year and a half later, and now he's at about 720, and he just hasn't paid anything towards them. And his quote was exactly what CJ said. Oh, 20 years, government will forget it. In 20 years, it'll be $7 million.
And that's the thing too, right? Is like I've talked about forgiveness, and then they hauled off, and it was $10,000. And in your guys' world, you took out $10,000 in just cafeteria food the first 3 years, right? So just understand that all is not what it sounds. I've said that like 9 times now. There are probably no refinance options available now. I mean, because none of the big banks are doing student loans anymore. Almost none of the banks are doing student loans. It's all fintech, like SoFi and people like that. Look into that option. What I wouldn't do though is reduce your term, right? Your student loan is, we view it, all we see every day. Trust me, I've seen worse. Ollie and I did a seminar with some sellers yesterday, and they asked me what the worst I've seen. I saw an orthodontic couple have $1.8 million in student loan at 31 years old. So I've seen worse. Whatever yours is, I've seen worse. So, but it's an investment debt. It's like buying a house. Do you buy a house on a 5-year term? No. Are you going to live in that house for 30 years? Probably not, especially if it's your first one, right? So just understand that you have to attack it responsibly, and don't have like a 20-year student loan and then go, holy cow, if I do it on an 8-year term, I'll get like a 2%, because now your payment's like $20,000 a month. So it's all about cash flow. So when you're lining up an acquisition, can your monthly expenses go with the practice profit and its expenses, right? So when you apply for a loan, we are going to, it's not like a home loan. An acquisition is not like a home loan. An acquisition is very specific to the practice you give me. I may approve you for $1 million loan, for $1 million practice. I might decline you for a $400,000 practice because you weren't going to make any money, or you're going to make significantly less than you're making today as an associate. And on the startup side, It is more.
Yeah,
like a
I'll
home loan.
touch on that.
Yeah, it is more like a home loan. Get approved, go find yourself a space, right? If you take anything away from this presentation today, it's going to be this slide right here, okay? Why should I own? Let's take, this is just a generic associate. Actually, real quick, how many of the associates in the room track your production?
Yeah.
Love that.
More and more every
I
single
know,
time.
maybe the gospel's getting out or something. But you wouldn't believe, for 10 years I've done this, how many people don't raise their hand when they say that, which is crazy. Because if you work corporate, they owe it to you. So get it, ask them for it. Don't care what their hurt feelings are. And if you work in private practice, it is a little more sensitive subject. But I'll tell you what's more sensitive is not tracking your production today. And then when you're going through the closing process, you walk up to your owner operator and say, can I get my production from last month? And it's the first time in 7 years you've asked for it. They've done this process before, by the way. They bought their practice also, or started. So they're going to tell you one of two things. Oh, where are you going? That's awesome. Here you go. Where is it? You know? Or they're going to say, door, see ya, don't let it hit you on the way out, right? So there's ways you can work through that. I think the number one, and for the owners in the room, and for the associates in the room, you wouldn't believe how many of you just haven't had a conversation with your boss, right? Or how many of you haven't had a conversation with your associate or the person that maybe got into dentistry because of you that lives nearby? Trust me, there are times when I watch a frustrated associate look all up and down the East Bay for a practice, and you know, like at the CDA, we do Thursday sellers and we do Saturday young dentist, prospective owners. And you wouldn't believe how many of the associates of the owners were in the room and they don't know that their person is looking to sell. It's all private, right? You've been on the Western Practice Sales website, right? You look down at it and guess what? It just says practice in East Bay. And it's like in Dixon, you know? So it's like, it's one of those things where you just may not know. So here's why you own. I went on a tangent there, that's okay.
What's new?
Your associate produces $50,000 a month, collects $600,000 annually, paid 30% of the collections, $180,000 in income. We are a national lender, so this is not California tax rate, but it is taxed net, 126. Right, and there's the misconception. Right out of dental school is not an option because student loan debt is too high. Versus becoming an owner, producing the same annually, but you know what you didn't get paid on as the associate if you're a GP? Hygiene, right? 40% margin after your loan payments and expenses, you're automatically making more just because you own, because of the hygiene department and some different things that if you're a specialist, you make money that you don't make as the 1099 associate. So, should I own? Yes. Should you do it? Yes. It pays for itself. Student loans pay for itself. Practice pays for itself. Don't get caught up in it's not the right time, because like Ali said, it's never not the right time, right? Or Tina Turner or whatever it was. I liked it.
So first time, borrower profile. So talking acquisitions and startups here, we'll start on the startup side. So as CJ mentioned earlier, it is a little bit more like a home loan, where I always tell people if you want to start up a practice from scratch, the first thing that you need to do is get approved. Why? Because we have a rent cap just standard across the country at $80,000 a month or a year for a lease rate. And it's kind of laughable thinking about that in the Bay Area because that's nowhere even remotely close. So that's why it's so important to go through underwriting, because once I have an approval in place, I can work with Foad and I can play with the numbers and say, hey, based off of our cash flow analysis, Dr. Smith can afford XYZ for the first 4 years, because that's what we look at. Like I mentioned earlier, the first 4 years are the most important. So we want to make sure from a rent standpoint you can afford it. So cash flow, when we talk about cash flow, when you get approved, we use what's called a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio analysis. So what that means is for every dollar of expense, both on the practice side and your personal side, you need to generate $1.20 in revenue. So that's how we get an approval in place. But back to the startups. So once you get approved, I tell Foad, This is the rent cap. He's obviously not going to start there because he just knows that that's the ceiling. He's going to negotiate with the landlord, see what's available, and go to market. And at that point, then we start to layer other people in when it's the right time, right? But on the acquisition side, CJ mentioned it earlier, tracking your production is so important. Once the dollar amount gets to a certain, I guess, purchase price, right? Because if you're buying $1 million practice, we assume as the buyer that you should be able to at least, well, not at least, but produce, say, 700,000 because 30% hygiene, 70% doctor production. So coming into a situation like that, we just need to know that you have the ability to produce what the seller produced.
Yep.
So license 1 to 5 years. On the startup side, income-wise, you're looking at about 120 to 150. Cash in the bank, 7 to 10% of the requested amount. So if you're starting a practice from scratch, the GP, I'll give you 700 grand. Specialist, I'll give you 750. So anywhere from 50 to 70,000 or so in the bank. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to do 100% financing, not requiring you to put any money down, but it's just more of a rainy day fund that we want to see. Expenses on the startup side, I like to say $6,000 or less a month, which includes whether you rent or own your home, your car payment, and your student loans. Keep those three under $6,000 a month. Student loan debt, it's situational. We understand student loan debt is a real thing. That's why we're here, right? You had to go to dental school. You have to get student loans. We understand that's part of the process. So making sure those things are in line for a startup, I'll approve you tomorrow. But as CJ mentioned earlier, on the acquisition side, it's very specific to the practice you are buying. So that's where you can get approved for the $1 million, or you could get approved for the $1 million practice, but you get declined for the $400,000 practice because you're not going to make any money, and depending on your lifestyle, you may not be able to afford it.
But there are $400,000 practices you can buy. You just have to find the right one.
Question. How long does this approval last?
Yeah, good question. So our startup approval is good for 4 months. So that gives you 4 months to find the space and get a lease in place.
Same thing on the acquisitions, 4 months.
Yeah, and as long as you don't go out, I always call this the Tesla rule. So don't go out and buy the Tesla. Don't go out and buy the expensive home. And as long as within those 4 months you don't change your personal financial situation, it's very easy to get another 4 months. But the only thing is the rate's not guaranteed if it goes for another 4 months.
And you run through our credit history when we get a pre-approval, right? Or you don't?
Say that again, sorry?
Do you run through our credit
Yes.
score?
It is a hard credit check,
It's a
yeah.
hard-
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the difference in, I mean, I could throw you a piece of paper that shows a rate and says, here it is, and you don't go through the process, but I'll make sure in an email I preface 90 times that this is nothing, this is not the thing, right? It's just, hey, you got pre-qualified, we more call it pre-qualification versus pre-approval, because I can know where you stand within 10 minutes of a conversation. Then it's all about either the practice you give me or the space and rent and all the things Foad will touch on. But I would say this is that as long as you take care of yourself personally, the first loan you get is going to be the easiest one you ever get. Second one's going to be more about growth and how well have you done. Because right now I'm going to lend to you because you have a DDS behind your name or DMD, and you are and you're taking care of yourself financially and cash in the bank and all that good stuff. So each transition is unique. Go ahead.
Yeah, so build your team. I mean, I'll touch on the startup side a little bit, and then I'll let him touch on the acquisition side. So what I would say to building your team, I said it earlier, please make sure whoever you're working with is dental specific. Come to me, come to Foad, come to Ali. We work with everybody within this area. I could tell you there's 10 to 15 dental specific contractors. I could tell you which one is priced at a certain dollar amount, who's the lowest, who's the middle, who's the most expensive, who's actually available and is going to return your call. It's more setting expectations and making sure that everybody on the team that you hire works together. The budget is so important on the startup side. I cannot reiterate this enough. When you are starting up a practice in the Bay Area, I always tell people $250 a square foot is bare minimum. Anywhere from $250 to maybe even $350 per square foot. I had one yesterday. I saw 1,100 square feet. It was $320 a square foot. So that's where understanding the budget up front is so important, especially when you're working with Foad. This is where we need to understand, can you afford this? How much can you afford in rent? And then there's something called tenant improvement allowance. So what that means is, while Foad is negotiating your lease, he's going to be talking to the landlord about potentially some free rent, but also tenant improvement allowance. So what that means is the landlord is going to contribute, most of the time, a certain dollar amount per square foot to the build-out. So what does that do? It reduces your cost from the loan standpoint to be able to make the deal actually work. And that's where, if you don't have someone dental specific on the real estate broker side, that's where you're going to run into issues. Because I've seen $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 construction bids come in, but those types of bids, we know that you can afford it because the landlord's contributing $200,000 to the project. So that's where I would say is super important on the front end, making sure, do a demographic report too, because understand what's the vision for your practice, right? What is the patient client, or what's the clientele in that area? What kind of demographic is it? So you can design your practice to fit that demographic.
And then on the acquisition piece, you're going to protect yourselves a few ways, right? Number one is legally, so you can get into the situation, you can get out of the situation, right? And your lease and contracts are fine. Number two is, from my end, cash flow. Can you afford it? And the accountant is going to give you relatively the same, he's number three or she's number three. It's going to be relatively the same analysis that I give, but they don't have regulatory bindings like we do, so we can't be as opinionated. On record, I'll be opinionated with you just in conversation. And then the last way is kind of a new approach to doing this because of some of the Delta Premier issues you're having, right? If you're a new doctor who's buying a practice, Delta Premier does not carry over to you, right, as the new owner. It's a buyer representative. That's a brand new fancy name for consultant, and they are doing the analysis on the charts and the patients and making sure how much dentistry is left to be done, or if you're a specialist, you know what's there. Because ultimately, me, Ali, and the CPA don't give you opinion on clinical, right? So what I'll say about that, it's kind of like a optional thing. You know, if you've analyzed and maybe you work in the practice, so you see what's going on, you understand the full breadth of what's happening, then you may not need someone like that. However, if you're rolling in off the street to buy the practice, and we had an instance where a broker told the client that it was 5% Delta Premier, didn't sound or smell right to them, so they hired a consultant, and it was 65% Delta Premier. There's a massive difference. Not saying that people are trying to pull the wool over your eyes, but just understand that people are and they are also, listen, that's why you build your team around you. Why? Because that practice broker, love them all, they're all great people, they're not on your team. Their job is to get the biggest dollar amount for their client, right? So you just have to take into mind that while they're being super nice, and they may have even connected you to me, or they may have even connected you to Ali, that's because they like working with us a lot, right? But at the same time, like once we meet, that is all they'll know about you for the rest of the time. Thank you for the introduction, and we're gonna be on your team to back you. So don't stip on and think that paying for the attorney early isn't gonna be worth it, or paying for a consultant isn't gonna be worth it, because you just wanna protect yourself. All right, any questions? We're going to do a Q&A at the end too, to kind of go off of all the presentations you hear. Yes?
So you're recommending more of a practice business consultant rather than insurance?
So much like the dental contractors, the dental attorney, the dental CPAs, there are dental consultants. Yeah. So I wouldn't hire just a true business, off the street business consultant, because it's a little different, right? Because in the dental world, you're buying a practice, for instance, off of the prior tax return. But if you're going to buy like a plumbing shop, you take like 3 years aggregate of collections, and it's all valued differently.
I think he was asking about an insurance.
Oh, insurance. Oh, yeah. Say that again then. Re-ask your question, because I was going into something way different.
You're recommending a dental business consultant
So there's, yeah, yep.
rather than like insurance related?
Yeah, so there's two different types of, so yes, there's two different types of people there. So one, you do have the consultant by a representative who's going to dig into the clinical aspect of the practice and make sure that, for instance, they didn't, because they all sat in the room today and yesterday in Sacramento, and they were like, oh, 85% of collections, okay. So the seller goes, all right, let's go in for the next year. I'm just going to drill and fill everything. And so their revenues go way up, right? Because that's what they've heard. So that person would be able to dig through clinically and see if there's any opportunity, and it's not you just buying a hygiene practice at that point, because all the patients are treated. And then there's an insurance piece of it, for the loan, you need certain types of insurances. So like business personal property, you need obviously your malpractice, but you also need business liability, right? So if somebody trips and falls in your office, it helps you pay for it. And then sometimes over $1 million, you need life insurance assigned. We don't require disability, so you don't have to go through that process with us like you do all of the other lenders. But I would encourage it, because disability is a huge thing for you, right? Make all your money right here. So if that goes away, you're in trouble. But then also there is a third part of it of like companies that will help you with the credentialing process and some different things on the insurance piece. A lot of times those practice management consultants will also help you credential, so you can kind of get it all under one umbrella. But right now, their main focus is to see what is left clinically, and on top of that is to really help you address the Delta Premier issue, because nobody really knows. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment about this. There are people who, this is all they do, is they help on the transition side.
Right.
You don't initially want to go to a practice management consultant that's going to charge you $50,000, $60,000 for like a 12-month contract, right? You can still hire these people long-term if you want, but they're specifically for the transition, so which makes it really affordable and digestible, because that's all they do.
Right.
So that's what you want to focus on.
Some of them have an a la carte situation where it's like, well, how much do you want us to help you with? Do you want us to do a quick run through of the numbers up front? $5 or $7 grand. Do you want us to represent you also, like in the negotiations? That's a little bit more money, right? So the good ones, the 3 or 4 good ones locally, will give you a range of what they could help you with. But 10 years ago, the selling broker would have probably told you to take a hike with that. Like, don't bring somebody else into this to muddy the waters. But right now, everybody's having such a tough time wrapping their head around the Delta issue that it's really helping encourage people as well as dissect the problem. Any other questions? Take our contact. We'll be around. Jim, are we taking a quick bathroom break, or what are we doing? We moving through, or?
We're planning to take a 15-minute break.
Perfect.
Cool. All right, well, thank you.
15-minute break. We'll be around. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for taking time on your Saturday morning to join us. I know it's been an amazing conversation thus far, and hopefully me going last will kind of help bring this full circle, and we'll have a panel at the end to kind of tie everything together. So, Rome. We're a commercial real estate firm, and we specialize in helping dentists like yourself throughout the peninsula, throughout the Bay Area, throughout California, find real estate to lease, to purchase, no matter where you're at in your career. I know we kind of took a pulse of the audience. We can help you with startups. If you're an existing doctor, we can help you find your second location, third location, or if you're transitioning out, if you need help with your lease negotiations, or even on the acquisition side. I believe Ali and Forrest and CJ kind of touched base on that. The real estate is essentially the common denominator throughout either one of those career paths, right? Startup, acquisition, second office, et cetera. So we're here to talk about the current real estate market and how you can use real estate to become practice owners and be your own boss and to build wealth. So we have about 30 years of combined experience helping doctors succeed their goals, and we never represent landlords or sellers. So we're on your side We only represent you as a tenant if you're looking to lease space, or if you're looking to buy real estate, we represent you as the buyer representative only. We never represent a landlord. We never represent a seller. So what do we do? Like I said, we can help you with startups, additional offices, expansions, building purchases, and lease renewals. And acquisitions, depending on which side you are. If you're a buyer, we can help you renegotiate those lease terms. I think Ali touched on that. Or if you're a seller, we can help renegotiate your lease terms so you can make your practice more marketable for that buyer to come. And we'll touch base on that later. So just like residential real estate, our representation of you is 100% free. Our commissions are paid by a landlord or a seller. Just like when you buy a house, you hire your residential agent to represent you. Same thing in the commercial world. Free representation from not only a market expert, but someone who knows your industry really well. So our clients' offices thrived during the pandemic. I know Ali talked about it, CJ talked about it, and they've exceeded their year-to-year projections. I mean, it's just incredible how you guys have outperformed the rest of the segment. And a lot of our questions, questions that a lot of our doctors are asking, is the market crashing? Are we going into a recession? Is inflation going to continue? I mean, the answer is the commercial real estate market is still booming here in the Bay Area. It's still hard to find good properties to lease. It's still hard to find good properties to buy. So I would say it's far from the truth, except if you're in the Midwest or somewhere outside of California. We are in an area where development is still happening. We're seeing constant development from multi-use projects. You can see it up and down El Camino Real, throughout the peninsula, throughout the South Bay. So our economy is booming here in Silicon Valley and the greater Bay Area. You may miss the boat if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to stand on the sidelines and see how this market is going to react, if interest rates are going to go down or maybe prices are going to go down. But guess what? You're going to miss out because you have to have, I'm going to use the D word again, you're going to have the DSO mentality and have the mindset that I want to be first to market. I want to identify a market, or identify an area that doesn't have, a GP, or if you're an endo, or if you're an oral surgeon, to go in and find that property and secure it. Because if you don't, someone else will. That's how scarce real estate is in the Bay Area. So it's an amazing time to grow if you're an existing practice owner, if you're looking to start up. I mean, rates, I know interest rates are still very attractive, but Bank of America can offer 100% financing if you're doing a startup. They can offer up to 100% financing if you want to buy your real estate. These products are incredible because of the success that you guys have in your business. They can use your equity if you're a practice owner to essentially buy the real estate 100%, zero out of your pocket, and talk to CJ and Forrest. And a startup too. I mean, the default rate, CJ, how much was that? 0.33. So it doesn't matter if you're doing a startup, if you're buying a real estate, if you're doing, if you want to acquire, but it doesn't matter. If you're doing a startup or an acquisition, the default rate is the same. And interest rates are still historical low. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, compared to now, yeah, things have changed, but in the long game of things, we're still historically low. So let's talk about startups. Location is everything, right? We gotta find the ideal location, ideal demographics. So this is an example of a startup. You want to be, sorry, skip the slide. No matter if you're in an office or a medical office building, or if you're in a busy Target center with, adjacent to a Safeway with other nationally anchored tenants, it doesn't matter. So what does matter is obviously the location and having a good team, and we can dive into that later. So does a startup look like this? No. Here's an example of a startup of one of our mutual clients that we have just down the street in Redwood City. Here's some other examples of startups. These are high-performing, extremely successful startups that have started the last 2, 3, 4 years, and guess what? They're all thriving and they're all growing. Pandemic-proof, recession-proof. So let's talk about your team. Obviously, we have, I would say, probably the 3 most important team members here. Obviously, you have Bank of America here, who is extremely, having a good dental lender on your side, no matter if you're looking to do a startup, if you're doing an acquisition or buying your real estate, extremely critical, because that makes my job a lot easier, because once we find a space for you, I know what your budget is, whether it's your rent budget or if you're looking to buy the real estate. And obviously, having an amazing dental attorney helping you identify issues with the lease. We'll dive into that later. We'll talk about that at the next slide. But having someone like Ali to ensure that you don't hit any legal issues in conjunction with having a good lender. I mean, having the 3 of us will ensure we have a smooth transition to ownership. Here's some other folks. Marketing, distributor, dental contract, dental CB. I mean, these folks are critical down the line, no matter where you're located in the process. We can help. They'll help you throughout the timeline. So here's the timeline. So my piece of this whole transition to ownership takes the longest. That's the hardest part for me, is to identify the real estate. We can help you find real estate, whether it's a day, it may take 30 days, it may take a year, especially here in the peninsula where the real estate is extremely scarce. I just helped a client in Palo Alto. It took almost 2 years to identify that property because the market is so scarce. I know some of you are nodding your head back there. You know what I'm talking about. So the real estate is the hardest piece of this puzzle. And then we talked about LOI, I think Ali or CJ, forgot who it was, the negotiations. That could take weeks, up to a month to finalize that letter of intent, that LOI. Then once the LOI is finalized, that's when it goes into the lease review. That's when Ali can start reviewing the lease and ensuring that, again, there's no legal issues before you actually sign. And then design that new office. That can take up to a month. And then construction, 9 months. And now that's being very, very generous. Right now, post-COVID, we've seen construction take a bit longer because of a lot of planning departments are bottlenecked. A lot of planning departments are short-staffed. They've furloughed a lot of people. So things are taking a bit longer. So it's important to have, obviously, a good dental-specific real estate broker that factors in that construction timeline into the lease negotiations so you don't pay any money out of your pocket. So how can we use real estate to lower your overhead? So I know, how many of you are existing practice owners? Raise your hand. Okay, do you guys know when your lease expires? Good. So if your lease expires in the next year to 2 months, that's the ideal time to renegotiate your lease because that gives you leverage, and leverage is power. Landlords thrive when they know that the tenant has 0 leverage. That's when they can take advantage of you. Remember, the landlord is not on your side. Remember that. Even though they may be your patient, they may be your family friend, you may play golf with them, still, the landlord's into the business of making money and maximizing their profit. So you only have one chance every 5 to 10 years, because most leases are either a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease, to get it right. And having proper representation to represent you from the onset is extremely important, because that'll essentially potentially save you tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Conversely, a lot of our doctors take a DIY approach to lease negotiations. They think that they can do it themselves, right? Or they'll just exercise the option that's in the lease. Well, the option is probably the least path of the resistance, right? A lot of doctors think, I'm just going to exercise my option and just renew. Well, the option period is a predetermined lease rate that the landlord negotiated maybe 5 or 10 years ago. The current market is probably going to be very different. When you leave yourself 12 to 24 months, that gives you enough time to assess the market, renegotiate your base rent, maybe lower your overhead. Your space may be dated at that point, probably 10 years old. Your real estate broker can negotiate tenant improvement allowances to maybe give you some new floor or paint dollars to use towards improving your space, and maybe some free rent. How amazing is that? Whereas your option period gives you nothing, and even a higher base rent. And with that leverage, for the practice owners out there, it may give you an opportunity to look at other opportunities in the market, whether you may have outgrown that space. You may want a larger space. You may want to buy real estate to build wealth for your practice, especially with the incredible products that Bank of America has. Like, again, they have a product that's 100% financing if you're an existing practice owner to buy your real estate. And again, interest rates are still historically low. So depending on where you're at in the process and when you bought your practice, you can still have an opportunity to refinance and lower your base rent, lower your overhead, in conjunction with lowering your base rent in the lease negotiations to lower your overall overhead. And that increases your cash flow, right? Because that's why we're here, to build wealth. So everything's negotiable, right? So from the base rent to annual escalations to the build-out period. So in a startup or a second location, the build-out period typically is 6 to 8, 9 months. We negotiate that into the lease negotiations so that our clients don't pay a dime during that period. And we negotiate a couple months of free rent after that too. So almost a total of 1 year's free rent. So startups are extremely attractive in that regards. The tenant improvement allowance, I think Forrest talked about that. So we know that the cost of construction may be a concern for a lot of folks. Well, our job as a real estate broker is to negotiate those tenant improvement allowances to help offset those costs so you can buy more equipment. So we bring the overall budget number down. Landlords get it. They know a good tenant when they see it, especially someone who has a 0.33 default rate. Good landlords, savvy landlords, know the value of a dental tenant. And they will shove out money to retain you and to keep you as a tenant. So other things we negotiated, like I said, is free rent, signage, parking, exclusive clauses if you're a pediatric dentist, if you want to be in a shopping center, or a general dentist, in a particular building that you don't want to have other dentists there. Those are things that we will negotiate on your behalf. And signage. So timeline, again, just kind of wrapping this up. So a new lease from finding the space to actually building it out to open house is probably close to a year. I would say 9 to 12 months, right? Right, Forrest?
Maybe longer, yeah.
So about 9 to 12 months. Building purchases, about the same thing. Identifying the building, your permitting process, because it takes time to build out. A renewal, again, 12 to 24 months. Give yourself 2 years. In an acquisition, folks that are interested in acquisition, when you guys do identify a practice to acquire, when you submit that LOI that Ali mentioned, call a real estate broker to look at the lease of that practice you're buying, because if there's not enough time in that lease, we can help you renegotiate that lease to get you better terms, right? Because the bank will need, CJ will need at least 5 years to 10 years to finance that acquisition. So we can do a free lease evaluation. That's one thing that we offer the members here at the Dental Society. So for those existing practice owners, I'm happy to look at your leases for free to help assess where you're at and where the market is and see if there's any room for improvement. So please reach out to me. I'll put my information at the end of the presentation. So again, having representation is critical. Don't do a DIY approach. This is a multi-million-dollar practice that you guys own. You don't want to fumble a sophisticated commercial real estate negotiation. You want to ensure that you have someone who knows the market, that knows your business, that has the market knowledge to save you tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because if you don't, if you hire a commercial agent that does restaurants or offices, or your residential real estate cousin who buys and sells homes, commercial real estate is highly sophisticated. You want someone who knows your business. And know who the parties are to a transaction. That name you see on a billboard, if you drive by, drive down El Camino Real and you see a nice building for lease or sale, that name on that billboard, that's the landlord's representative. That's the seller's representative. That person has a fiduciary duty to the landlord, not to you. Remember that, because if you call them, you kind of inadvertently start the negotiations, and they'll want you to sign an LOI immediately, and then things get kind of hairy. So in closing, hire professional representation, have an expert track your lease expiration dates, give yourself enough time, because time is leverage, right? Time is leverage. And make sure your real estate broker has a game plan, depending on whether you're wanting to do a startup, wanting to buy real estate for your practice, or some folks are here to acquire a practice. Give yourself enough time and have a game plan with your team. That's me. Questions? Real estate. No real estate questions. People more important about money and legal issues. Yes, sir.
I have a question. It's just sort of a what if. I'm on Woodside Road in Redwood City, and there's a lot of construction, reconstruction, demolition. What happens in a lease if you're in a building that is targeted for redevelopment?
Great question. That is happening throughout the Bay Area, and I know we have similar clients that are in similar situations. So it depends what's in the lease. So again, if there's a relocation clause, it's important to have the lease reviewed, right? It's important to have the lease reviewed to see what remedies you have if the landlord/developer is planning to boot you out of the building. So I would say contact me, contact Ali to review that. But we're seeing that throughout the Bay Area. There's a shortage of housing, and landlords, developers are looking at these prime pieces of real estate, and they see dollar signs. How many units, housing units, can I squeeze into this plot of land and maximize my profit? Right? So yeah.
It's down the street from us.
So yeah, we're seeing it throughout the Bay Area.
Are they not willing to renew your lease?
We're not at that point yet, but I've got another question. Our building is owned by a couple who are elderly, I would say, and we redid the lease a year or so ago, and they did not want to add an extension. I've been in the building 20 years, and we had extensions before. I have a feeling they don't want to because
That's a red flag.
yeah, more value to them if they don't have these extensions. So.
That's a red flag. So if the landlord isn't willing to add another 5-year option to that, I would, consult with myself, because ultimately your legacy is on the line. When that lease expires, that landlord may say, "Thank you, we're about to develop this property into a mixed-use project," and then you're homeless. So leave yourself enough time. How much time do you have left? 4 more years. Okay. So I would say maybe let's start looking. Yeah, let's start looking. Let's start looking. Let's start looking. Yes, sir.
What
someplace like, oh, this is only for retail and whatever. Like, how do you, like, what kind of facilities are you not really allowed to open dental practices?
So,
Because I see them in malls and I see them in like, you know,
great question. So part of my job, part of my due diligence for my clients is to essentially weed out all the noise. I'll ensure the zoning works, so we'll get in touch with the planning departments on your behalf to ensure the property is zoned for dental and medical. If it's not zoned for dental and medical, then obviously we have to look at other properties. But when I present properties to my clients, these are what can work in the market. They're zoned, it has enough parking because the parking requirement for dental is usually about 5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. So these are things that we do for our clients to ensure, you know, we show them the best properties that work. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, this is a complicated one that I've seen come up. This is my wife does Wills Trust and Estates, and we had a lease. She had an issue that was challenged because the elderly couple, they passed, transitioned to the kid, and what was controlling the lease was the trust instrument. And that said that they could do anything they want, and of course they wanted to sell the building. So they kicked everybody
Oh,
out.
man.
And then there was a fight. What controls the lease or the trust instrument that has language in it? So
Yeah, no, the lease would control there. The trust steps into the shoes of the owners, right? So they can transfer the real estate, but the tenants are secure in their leases unless there's language that says, you know, upon a transition or something.
that's the thing. It referred to the trust document,
Yeah,
but the trust document was not provided, but
Oh.
they signed it anyway.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And so they all got kicked out. And then, of course, litigation happened, but they ended up losing.
Yeah.
Because they didn't see the trust document,
That's
so
correct.
it's signed anyway.
That's correct.
Oh, that's tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yeah,
that's
that's
another
terrible.
part of this thing. When you talk about securing all your things, you should also secure now your financial future with your estate planning that brings all this in, because that's really crucial. But that's why it's so important to have people like that, like over here, this team, because I saw that happen. That was awful.
Just another example. I had a doctor call me earlier this week. They found a space 2 years ago, negotiated the deal themselves, and they called me and they said, "Hey, you know, I'm an orthodontist. The space that I'm in right now is extremely dated. It's really old. It's got like wood paneling, and I don't like the floors, and I want to change it up. How can you help me get tenant improvement dollars?" And I said, "Doctor, tell me when your lease expires." He's like, "Well, I signed a 10-year lease 2 years ago." He has 8 years left on his term, right? I said, "Doc, I wish you would have called me 2 years ago when you negotiated this deal yourself, because right now you really don't have that much leverage with the landlord to go back to them and ask for, you know, a $20,000 credit, unless you're willing to maybe sign another 5-year lease or, you know, add some more term to your lease." But remember, always have leverage at the beginning. When you're in the middle, or, you know, 3 months from expiration, 1 month from expiration, you have no power at all in your lease negotiations. What else, guys? Yes, ma'am.
So if you are purchasing the practice,
Yeah.
and in the owner's lease, it says that the landlord has to approve of the sale, right? So does that mean the owner then goes to the landlord and has to have a conversation with them first before the buyer goes and tries to negotiate? Or like, how does that?
So depending on what the assignment language is, that's why it's good to have your attorney review not only the asset purchase agreement, but also the existing lease to see what, you know, bumps in the road potentially there are. But yeah, I would rely on the assignment language in the lease. Ali, anything to add to that?
What was the question?
The landlord needs to approve. So she's looking to buy a practice, and the landlord needs. Is it in the lease?
I believe so, yeah.
The lease language states that the landlord needs to approve of the sale of the business.
Oh, really? Wow. Wow.
Are you
Okay. Well, usually, if that's the case, yeah. I mean, it's not uncommon, but it is uncommon, but we've seen it, but it's really uncommon to allow a tenant to allow a landlord that kind of power. It may actually be even a violation of the dental board rules. Like, I don't even think a landlord can have that power to dictate who a dentist can sell their practice to. But what might be the case, if it's not that, is that the landlord has the right to approve or not approve you as the buyer signing the lease, right? And that's part of normal assignment language. So it might be that, and maybe the seller misspoke, but yeah, usually the landlords have to act reasonably. So unless you have like a short sale or a bankruptcy or something in your history, if you're approved by a bank, the argument is that it's reasonable for a landlord to approve you as well, right? So, but yeah, you do have to go through that process. Yeah.
All right, so we want to open it up to all questions now. Who wants the first one? All right, let's go home.
If you have an option on your lease, is that as good as just the lease, like a 5-year option? You know, like the other gentleman said, you know, he thinks the owners might be thinking about selling the building or whatever. So I have X number of years on my normal lease, and then I have an option. Is the option, where would that fall into place? Does that make sense?
So I mean, it's good to have an option as a tenant that gives you a bit of security to continue your tenancy there. But again, an option is a pre-negotiated rate. It might be the language may say 103% of prior year's rent, right? But if prior year's rent is 20% above market, that leaves you in a interesting position if you want to exercise that option.
But I guess my question is maybe simpler than that. That if you have the option, that still means the landlord technically couldn't sell the building out from under you before that time, before the option comes into place.
They could sell the building. They could sell the building, but you're talking about throwing you out.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, you can exercise your option. You have a right to say that because you have the option language.
That's my question. Yeah.
Regarding the option period you're speaking about and market rate, what has the market rate been since, you know, the last 5 or 10 years? What has ever happened with the interest rates going up? Are they still going up in this area?
Yes.
Okay.
All the above.
The Bay Area will never do this.
All the above.
Yeah, the key is you have to remember, I think, you're in a special category, right? You're not a restaurant, you're not a coffee shop, you're not what people, where you hear on the news that prices are going down and there's vacancies. All that is true. All you have to do is walk down, you know, downtown San Francisco and everything is closed. But that's not, but that's not you, right? For you, the landlords know you're highly valuable. It's high cost to build out a space. And so when they have a medical dental building or a space, the prices just kind of keep going, right? And so, you know, there will be dips, of course, like anywhere else, but the reality is that it's going to keep going up. And so it's unlikely that you're going to find a situation where a recession is going to lower prices so much on a rental that you can just sort of jump ship. On the purchase, it's a whole different story, right? People are highly leveraged. They thought they could get different prices. Now they're looking to sell a building or a condo. Then, you know, there you can find some deals.
I have a question going to skew a lot of the production numbers. So if you were to look into acquiring practice now, well, the past 3 years, they might have been premier providers, but that's not even a thing anymore. So it's like, should we just kind of, is that just going to be negotiated? Be like, hey, these numbers, they're not going to match up when I acquire it? Or you just kind of wait it out?
Did you see how fast Ali passed me the microphone? So I go on video for this. So primarily, the bank and everybody else is driving off of the prior year tax return, right? Well, different in some small business scenarios. It's a collection of 3 years aggregate, blah blah blah. So why is that? First, before we get to the Delta question, that is because if a practice was doing $1.5 million 2 years ago, but if it's doing 700,000 right now, you're not going to pay $1.4 million for that practice, right? And you'll get that sometimes of people who have sharp declines in their offices. They'll try to say, well, it was $1.5 million practice just 3 years ago. And unfortunately, we pay for the in recent scenario, like right now, what is in this moment, what is this practice? Because ultimately COVID drove people away and some people didn't come back, right? And whether some people went to other offices because they were still open and yours was a little slow to open, or they moved or whatever, right? So prior year's number is where you're basing off of. Now you'll get some sellers who are doing better this year, right, than they were last year. And they all sat in this very similar type of seminar and they heard 75 to 90% of collections, right? That's a general rule of thumb. You know, the best thing about rule of thumbs is they're the worst. So but that on average, right, if you're selling practice in the peninsula, you're probably closer to 90% of collections, GP. You know, referral-based business a little less. If you're in Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's probably closer to 75%, right? So prior year's tax return. Insurance, Delta is that's kind of what I touched on in our presentation about. It's the hot button issue. There should be an adjustment. I think the CDA would also agree that it's not a one-for-one loss, though, right? If the office is 50% Delta Premier, I don't think you taking over tomorrow, you immediately lose 50% in revenue. It's not. I think in talking with the CDA, it was like closer to like 5 to 15%, somewhere in that of what it actually is. But I'll tell you some scenarios. We did an acquisition for a gal outside of Sacramento, and 18 months later, she bought a practice for like $700,000 or $800,000, doing $1 million. She dropped Delta, switched her whole focus on what she was doing, right? Went pretty much close all fee for service, and she's like pacing to do like $1.7 million this year. So it's not always what you hear of absolute worst case scenario, $500,000 of my patients just walked out the door because I'm not a premier provider. So that's why I think you have to dig into the depth of what it is. And sometimes some of those fee schedules aren't even much different. You know, so there are people who can do that for you. Does that answer your question? It was a really roundabout way to answer it.
Let me build on that too. You know, if there's anything good that came out of COVID, it's this issue with Delta, because pre-COVID, even though Delta was doing what it's doing, there was no price adjustments, like zero price adjustments. And people were in your shoes saying, well, a second, I'm buying this practice. It's 30% going to be, hit on Delta because of the whole Premier thing. Why am I still paying top dollar? There was no answer for it. Everybody was buying it for top dollar. Since COVID, that has totally shifted, right? So there is a price reduction as a result. But as CJ mentioned, you got to look at the numbers, because if it's it's 30% basically reduction of the Delta patient revenue. But it's not exactly accurate, because some are Delta Premier, some are Delta PPO, and you don't know that in your practice management software. It doesn't keep track of the different different Delta programs. It just has Delta, and so it becomes very difficult to get a pinpoint. But the general rule is like 30% of those numbers, but there is a reduction, which is good, because Premier is no longer there.
On Delta, if there's a longer transition and you have like an associate or buy-in or whatever, what are the rules for Delta Premier? If the associate's doing the work, can you still bill it?
Get off the mic.
Yeah. Can I break the mic? Let's turn off the camera and.
Yeah, the sense of you need to get your associates credentialed, and they need to be billed under themselves. That's what the law says.
That's a good very matter of fact.
What? Yeah, we can't
I'm gonna
say
start
anything
answering
else.
questions, but
Yeah.
that's what the law says.
What happens in reality is different, but we can't really advise on that.
So two questions. Can you ever classify somebody as an independent contractor? That's pretty tough.
It's almost impossible these days. Pre-COVID, it was much more possible. Now it's very, very hard to put anybody as an independent contractor because of the IRS revamp rules and the state revamp rules. If you're a seller of a practice and you want to work back for 6 months, a year, you're probably okay being an independent contractor, not because it's within the rules. You're still violating the rules, but the chance of getting caught is a lot less, right? Because you're like a short amount of time. But if you're hiring an associate for many years, your chances of getting caught go up, pretty significantly. And so it's a risk, it's a risk. It's only, from what the CPAs tell us, it's only like an 8 to 10% increase in cost of hiring an employee versus an independent contractor. I think with the new rules in California, that's probably a little bit low. It's probably a little bit more than that because now you have to provide 401k potentially unless you exclude them as a high income earner. There's PTO, sick leave. There's some other costs that you have to provide, but call it 10%, more. So it's not that bad.
And then I know some people that have bought practices during a transition period where they're trying to purge all of the PPOs and whatever and go fee for service. How long do you have to let that wash out before you can get an accurate number of now within a practice?
So going insurance independent is one of the best things that has happened in the last couple of years as a result of what Delta has done. Most practices that go insurance independent end up losing a lot of patients, but much more profitable, and revenues go up and whatnot. So for the right practice, going insurance independent is by far the better strategy. But it's a process, right? It's a 9-month to 12-month process from the time you say, I'm going to go insurance independent to getting it done, because you have to hold the hands of the patients and your team throughout the whole thing. Because otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of patients. Because if they say the wrong things or you communicate the wrong way, like it all goes south. It's one of the reasons I think insurance companies are worried about what's happened is because so many people have gone insurance independent here. I don't think they realized the power of the dentist, right? They thought that, especially Delta thought that what they did in Washington and Hawaii and other states, they could do here, and they did, and then dentists started pushing back. Right? And now everyone's going independent. Not everyone, but a lot of people are going insurance independent, and it's increasing and putting a lot of pressure on them. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, I think, for Fuad and Forrest. There are a lot of facilities for sale, like no patients, but they're like built out already, equipment. What are your thoughts about those kind of?
I love that.
Those are incredible.
Mainly because of cost, right? Because, like I said earlier, that 250 to 350 number is real. So if you have, and the majority of that 250 to 350 is ripping the floors up, doing all of the underneath work, the plumbing, everything like that. That's what really costs the most. So if you have everything that's in line, you have 4, 5, 6 ops, whatever that may be, I can still give you money to, as long as you are not buying the facility, so if there's no equipment or anything like that, I can still give you $700,000 to refresh it, everything like that. But if there's equipment involved, we'll still give you up to about $350,000 or so, because we assume that if the equipment is involved, it's a facility sale, we assume that you go in there and you should be able to start operating tomorrow, right? To some extent. But we'll still give you some money to do a little facelift, maybe add some equipment. But at the end of the day, those are what I call unicorns, because especially timing wise too, you're not gonna need to pull permits sometimes to build everything out. and it's just better and quicker and cheaper.
And another question, if we are coming right out of residency and we don't have like a year's worth of production reports, do we still get financing? Is that?
Like a specialist?
I'm doing like a 1-year residency for special care dentistry, but I used to work as an associate for 4 years.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's still fine.
Yeah. Yep. And then did you want to add something?
Yeah. We really want your best month or two of production, whenever that was. Just as long as it wasn't like 15 years ago and you haven't done it since. We just want to see what you're capable of doing. And then I'll comment on the facility sale too, just that there are some practices out there that are low revenue, or just make sure you're analyzing the right reason of why that is of just a facility or an underperforming practice, right? If it's an underperforming practice because it's behind a Safeway and a dumpster and it's not a great location, that's a little bit different opinion than somebody was super successful and bought their own building 4 or 5 miles down the street and moved because of that, because obviously that shows the ability to be something. Or the one that, if there's a patient base and it's very small, maybe it was an overlook, maybe the satellite office didn't take out like they thought it would, they didn't have time. Right? That's the biggest thing we come across is, I had a third-year dental student call me once and tell me they wanted to own 5 practices. I said, let's start with number 1. That's the thing, is people get a little over-ambitious. So analyze why it's either vacant or why it's a low-revenue office. So not every one of those scenarios is perfect.
Yeah, if the location is great, and if you see an opportunity there, absolutely take it, because these are unicorns in the market. I know maybe off my 2 hands how many facilities are for lease or for sale, real estate with that used to be a dental office for sale throughout the Bay Area. So if you come across an opportunity like that, really take a hard look, because that's going to save you, $400,000, $500,000 just on construction alone. And you can allocate the rest of your budget towards marketing and, equipment and, building up the practice. So yeah, I would really consider that.
If anybody's looking in Saratoga online. Saratoga, 6 ops, 1,900 square feet, fully built out. So if anybody's interested, let me know.
Yeah, Saratoga, so rent will be cheap.
It actually is very affordable, believe it or not. Yeah. I might go to dental school to go occupy it.
Anything else?
You acquire an office and you don't like your staff. Like, what are you legally obligated to do?
Yeah.
To
You want to take this, Steve?
Let me take this.
So there's something called, discrimination in terminations, as you guys probably know, but there's also something called discrimination in hiring or non-hiring. And so when you're buying a practice, you have to be very careful about who you don't hire, because that could also be considered, unlawful. So you have to be strategic about how you do it. If you're bringing everyone on board after you've hired them, and then you want to let them go because you've seen their performance and it's not great, then you just have to be smart about who it is and how you do it and whatnot, and we can kind of walk through those with you depending on the scenario. If you happen to be firing all the pregnant people in the office, that's going to be a problem. You know what I mean? Or all the older people, which is typically the case, that could be a problem. But you got to be a little bit smart about kind of how you do it. But not hiring everyone when you buy a practice is also a little bit risky, right? Because again, if you don't hire, the pregnant, disabled person or the older person, and that's the only person you don't hire, they could come back at you. And unfortunately, there are lawyers who target dentists right now. There's a couple of law firms that we get letters weekly because they're going after dentists, and it's almost the same letter over and over again. So there are people out there that your staff members know how to get to. So you do have to be very, very careful. So it doesn't mean you can't terminate them. It just means you have to be strategic.
And I think too, because I don't know if all of you know, when you take over practice, you fire everyone and then you rehire everyone, right? So that's where he's going. I would always encourage not rocking the boat too much, because unfortunately there's a lot of, fortunately also, that there's a lot of commitment to that previous owner, right? I always say if, the former doctor used to have him set all the stuff here, and then now you're having them set it here, and that is the biggest deal in the entire world. Because ultimately it's get in there, get moving, and then make your changes as you grow your relationship with them too. If you come in and you're axing everybody and you're throwing paint on the walls, and it's like, that's a whole new world for them. So be careful, right?
Yeah, I'll give an example of something that just happened yesterday on our drive up to Sacramento. This occurred. A consultant was helping a practice transition, told the buyer that they couldn't afford, one of the 3 hygienists that was working in the office. The buyer didn't hire the hygienist, that one, hired the other 2. Hygienist goes downstairs to another office, and all the patients started following him. So what happens? The other 2 hygienists get upset that hygienist wasn't hired. They leave and go to other offices. Guess what happened with those patients? Right? Yeah. And it's a real thing, right? It's a real thing. And so, like, if it doesn't feel right, even if a consultant says it, like, if it doesn't feel right in your gut, you're just like, I don't know. Call someone, right? Call me, call the dental society, call someone, and start asking questions like, does that feel right? Kind of like a second opinion, right? Does that feel right? Should I do that? Should I not do that? It's not always about dollars and cents. It's about other factors too. Yeah.
When you're rehiring everyone, even though they've been working there forever, can you put them on like a 3-month probation period to see if it's a fit, so you could fire them if it's like, wow, this assistant drops everything and costs me way too much money, I can't work with them?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, absolutely. So because, as CJ mentioned, legally the seller has to fire everyone on the closing date or right before, and then you legally have to hire everyone back on. That's why, we always say, about a month before closing, start working with HR for Health to get all your new hire documents and employment manuals and all that set. Once you hire them, they're a new hire for you, right? So you can put them on a 3-month probationary period. The only thing you have to be careful about is that the 3-month probationary period is a made-up thing, right? It was made up by HR professionals to be used as an evaluative tool, right? So you can't just terminate them for any reason during those 90 days. Like if they suddenly get pregnant, right? Like you got to be very careful, right? And so, but there's a strategy that's in place that we have that allows you to kind of just document things and then let them go. But so if you find, or the seller in that practice says to you, hey, this, you have to, I get it, you have to hire everybody, but this one like drops everything and she always comes in, the tray's not ready, and she doesn't know her teeth numbers, all that kind of stuff. You want to talk to us early so that during that 90-day, you can just follow the plan, because at 90 days, unless she wows you, you're going to terminate her. Does that make sense? Yeah, good question.
Just quickly, a lot of people think because they have that at-will contract that they have a get-out-of-jail-free card and can do whatever they want, but there's certain class protections and things that you can go to that is not the case. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I call it the at-will conspiracy, because it's like everyone talks about it as if it's like you said, like a trump card that you can do whatever you want. But the reality is that you can't in California, because we're in California, so you have to just be very careful about who you let go. But you eventually can let them go. You just have to follow a process. Yeah.
This might be more of a real estate question, but on the peninsula here, and for the bankers, what would you say what an average triple net lease number is per square foot? Or even like the bankers looking like, okay, what is your percentage of your rent to what this monthly income of the practice is? What is that number you're looking at?
Again, it depends where we're looking at. Are we looking at Palo Alto, or are we looking at, San Carlos? Are we looking at Burlingame?
Yeah.
It just varies. Is it a retail center? Is it a
Well, how about like
medical
the
office
Palo
building?
Alto location that you just did, which would be very high end, I
So
would
Palo
say.
Alto, $6 to $7 a square foot plus triple net.
That's why it's hard to do a startup there.
$6 to $7 a square foot plus triple net in Palo Alto. That's just, retail, medical buildings. Yeah.
Wow. And then as a percentage of what, when you're looking to approve somebody,
Yeah.
you say, what is your rent compared to what you think you can produce? What is that?
So what I will say is on average, industry average across the country, we use about 7 to 9% roughly of your overall overhead should be rent, but obviously around here that's so unrealistic. It is higher. So for established doctors, at the end of the day, it's all about can you afford it, right? Cash flow wise, because we're analyzing, say for example, if you want to move your office down the street and buy the building, we're looking to see can you afford it, right? That 1.2 debt service coverage ratio I mentioned earlier. So we are basically lending on the success of your existing practice right now. Can you afford, and can your current practice today maintain and handle, be able to afford the new debt that you're bringing on? Is it still doable? Is it still reasonable? Are you still going to be able to pay yourself and be able to live, right? So it's all based off of the historical production of your practice, but the rent just plays a piece into that because obviously your margins are going to be a little bit less than someone in Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So in the peninsula, you'd say 7 to 9, above 7 to 9% is going to be your rent.
Definitely, yeah. I don't have an exact number, but it's higher than that, yeah. And then we have some evaluation sheets on your tables, so we really would appreciate you filling those out. So, because we're trying to get better, right? So, any talk about how really bad Ali was in his presentation, make sure to write it down.
And we're sticking around, so after you guys fill those out, if you guys want to chat some more, we're here.
Thanks for taking
Thank
your
you.
time. Thanks to Nakia, Jim, and Mike for hosting this, and thanks for spending some of your time on a Saturday. So appreciate everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.